So I'm going to try and bring you up to speed with this whole situation with NATO and Turkey and Finland and Sweden. Basically, after the war in Ukraine began on February 24th, you've had renewed calls to expand NATO, right? And Sweden and Finland, about 2 weeks ago, they said that they're contemplating joining NATO. And now they've taken the step to do that. So this is from The Guardian. This is from just a few hours ago, Monday, May 16th. Sweden follows Finland in confirming it will apply to join NATO. So the Swedish government has confirmed it intends to apply for membership of NATO, joining neighboring Finland in a dramatic decision that marks one of the biggest strategic consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine to date. Quote, there is a broad majority in Sweden's parliament for Sweden to join NATO, said the Prime Minister, Magdalena Andersson. This is the best thing for the security of Sweden and its people. We will inform NATO we want to become a member of the alliance. So, just so you can visualize what's going on, let's look at a map, right? So, here's a map of Europe, and more specifically of existing NATO members and when they joined and expected applications. You can see as we have Finland and Sweden in mint green or turquoise, depending on your color vision. This is, of course, very significant. Why? Because Russia shares a border with Finland that runs about 1,300 kilometers. So in miles, that's about 2,000 miles. That's enormous, right? And it's not only about the size of it, it's the principle, because what the Russians have been saying, their argument of why they went into Ukraine and launched this offensive, they said denazify and demilitarize. But something that the Russians have been saying for decades, so before Vladimir Putin was president, is that they feel threatened by NATO expansion. And there was an agreement between the West and the Russians that if the Russians support reunification of Germany, when I say Russians, I mean Soviets specifically. This is 1990, right? So it's still the Soviet Union. The agreement was that if the Soviets support German reunification, NATO will not expand past the Elbe. Obviously, that's not what happened, because even after the Soviet Union ceased to exist, which was the whole point of creating NATO in 1949 to counter the Soviet Union. Even after there was no more Soviet Union, since then, in the last 3 decades, NATO has not only grown, but doubled its membership, right? And you have to take into consideration that right now there are about 30 members in NATO. But NATO also has dozens of partners, what they call NATO partners. Now, for all intents and purposes, it's really kind of the same thing, because those NATO partners, like Sweden and like Finland, are trained to NATO standards, right? They call this interoperability. So as the name implies, they're interoperable. So, if you're in a combat situation or a training exercise, whatever it is, you can pluck out an Italian unit or a British unit and just replace it with a Swedish unit or a Finn unit, right? So that's the same with the Ukrainians. NATO is training the Ukrainians also for interoperability. And that's very serious, right? Because it sort of implies you intend to use them at one point. It could be interpreted that way. Now, I'm telling you this because I just want you to understand this is a significant development, but you shouldn't, be under any, you shouldn't get it confused. Don't get it twisted, right? Like these two countries, Sweden and Finland, were already NATO partners, okay? Nevertheless, let's not downplay this, okay? So the idea now is that Sweden have said they're not going to have a referendum. Very democratic, right? So they're not going to put this to a referendum. They're just going to go ahead and do it, the government. And Finland, what they're going to do is they're going to try and, for the sake of keeping up appearances, they're going to ram it through parliament, okay? Now, the thing is, since 24th of February, since the war in Ukraine began, public support for joining NATO in these countries, Finland and Sweden, has increased. Now you have a majority in both countries of the people polled, right, who want to join NATO. So you cannot deny that the public support has indeed increased. In any case, let me just go back to the article. I'm going to show you a bunch of different things and why this relates to Turkey, right, because that's very important. So just going back to the Guardian article, they say, so Anderson, who's the Swedish Prime Minister. She said that after a parliamentary debate on Monday, Sweden would be in a vulnerable position while the application was processed, but that ministers saw no direct military threat from Russia at present. Stockholm had received security assurances from several key partners, including the US, Britain, Germany, France, and the Nordic countries, which includes Denmark. I was going to get to that in a bit, right? And the Finnish government confirmed its intention to join NATO on Sunday, so that's just yesterday, May 15th, shortly before Andersson's ruling Social Democrats announced decades of opposition to back a Swedish bid. Abandoned decades of opposition to back a Swedish bid for membership. So this is very significant because Sweden has been a neutral country, more or less, for the last 100, 200 years, right? And I think this is another reason why all of this is very significant, because you're seeing a lot of neutral countries like Germany, or the EU is not a country, but it claims to be an organization that doesn't get involved in wars. And now, Sweden, Finland, they're basically they're breaking with their declared neutrality and switching sides, taking a side, I should say, right? So this is why it's significant. Now, why does this relate to Turkey? Well, Turkey is a NATO member, okay? Turkey, as a matter of fact, is the second largest army in NATO. So it's no joke, right? And it's kind of funny because you have a lot of people that are angry at Turkey now, after Turkey said that it's not really sure it wants Sweden and Finland to join. So the way this works with NATO membership, if you want to join NATO, everybody needs to approve, right? So there has to be unanimous consent among the member states, right? So every single NATO member has to say, okay, for you to be able to join. If only Turkey says no, that's it. Sweden and Finland cannot join. Now, this was a few days ago, so on May 14th, where Erdogan was saying that he doesn't have a positive opinion on this. Let me play you this clip very briefly. There's no sound, but you can see the subtitles. So he says, we're currently following the developments in Sweden and Finland, but we do not have a positive opinion on this. Right? And Turkey has accused both nations of harboring terrorist organizations. So Turkey has an axe to grind with these Scandinavian countries. And right now, their position is that, you know what, if you want us to approve your NATO application, we want something in return. What does Turkey want in return? Well, Turkey has several demands, right? Number one, they want the arms embargo lifted because there's an export ban on some of their products, which they want removed, right? They also want Sweden and Finland to end their support for the Kurdish groups like the PKK and the YPG. So the PKK is, I'm not going to go into the whole story of this now, but basically, officially in Turkey and the US and the EU, they're considered a terrorist organization, okay? You know, they're fighting basically for independence in Turkey and then an autonomous region. And the YPG is the, if you could call it that, the sister group or affiliate inside Syria. And Turkey also considers that to be a terrorist group. So basically, Turkey is saying, you guys in Sweden and Finland, you're harboring these guys that we consider terrorists, and which the US considers terrorists and so on. And we want you to stop that. And what do they mean by that? What does Turkey mean when they say end support? Because, you know, these countries in Scandinavia, Sweden, Finland, and so on, technically speaking, they already recognize the PKK and the YPG as, well, specifically the PKK as terrorist groups, right? So what is there to change here exactly? Well, the thing, what the Turkish government wants is this. They want extraditions. So Turkey demands extradition of PKK members from Sweden and Finland for NATO bid. So this is, again, from a few hours ago in the Middle East Eye. And Turkey said yesterday that Sweden and Finland must provide security guarantees on the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, and lift all arms embargoes against Ankara before it can support their NATO membership bids. Okay, so Ankara said they're making progress with Finland on this issue, but Sweden is being, quote-unquote, provocative, right? And that Turkey is not going to budge unless they get these security assurances. So they're basically, they're painting this as we're not painting this, but they're just stating this is a security issue. Because again, they consider them terrorists and they want them extradited to be tried. Turkish President Erdogan said that Ankara would not rubber stamp their accession to the alliance over their alleged lax attitude towards the PKK, which for 4 decades has waged war against the Turkish state, first for a Kurdish independent state and later for an autonomous region. Turkey, the US, and the EU all designate the PKK as a terrorist organization due to a history of deadly attacks on civilians. So this is, again, interesting because, Turkey, as I told you, is the second largest NATO member. It has the second largest army in NATO, right? And obviously they have ties with the US. Now, the problem is that the United States is working with the Kurds in northeastern Syria, right? So we're talking about Hasaka and Deir ez-Zor in these governorates. Or what the hipster morons at Vice News like to call Rojava. They just randomly decide to change names. It's Hasaka and Deir ez-Zor. These are two governorates in Syria. So this is where you have the oil, where all the oil is and where the crops are grown. It's called the breadbasket region because of that, because it's so valuable, right? I saw a map earlier where, there was basically what each governorate inside Syria produces, right? And I wanted to post it and say, like, guess which ones have American troops occupying them? It's the one with wheat and oil. And in any case, there, the Americans are not alone. They're working with the Kurds, right, with the SDF. So the Syrian Democratic Forces. It's basically, it sounds like it's the Syrian army. It's not the Syrian army. It's a bunch of militias that are led by General Mazloum, I think his name was, right? So, which is Kurdish led. And Turkey is angry because of this, right? Because they're supposedly in NATO with the United States, and if the United States is supporting a group that Turkey considers to be terrorist, right? So this is not just about Sweden and Finland. This reflects a much broader issue. And I think Turkey right now, they are trying to leverage this for something in exchange. Because the export ban, I don't think that's the big issue compared to the extraditions. I have no clue whether they're going to budge on that, Sweden and Finland. We'll see. They might come up with some other compromises. I'm just very briefly seeing various reactions in Turkey from academics and politicians and former ministers and so on. And some of them are suggesting that Turkey should, leverage this in exchange for EU membership or recognition of Northern Cyprus, right? So, which is, again, as the name implies, Northern Cyprus, which is occupied by Turkey, and they've sort of made a de facto state there, which is recognized by no one. They're occupying Cyprus, right? So they could leverage in exchange for those things because, many people feel that Turkey is already isolated, right? They feel that Turkey's been dealt an unfair hand because Greece was admitted to the EU, Cyprus was admitted to the EU, and they got Turkey into NATO, but they won't let Turkey into the EU, right? And that's something that Turkey's wanted for a very, very long time. And of course, there are many reasons why they don't allow that. There are basic requirements, economic requirements, and so on. One of them, for example, is that Turkey refuses to recognize the Armenian genocide. I mean, this is really very basic, but they won't do it. But there are other reasons. And so Turkey, a lot of people in Turkey, they feel that we're already isolated. So why should we be afraid of being further isolated right now? Let's do what's good for us. That's sort of the sentiment that people have right now. And let me just play you a quick clip from Blinken, and I'll continue.
And the United States would strongly support a NATO application by either Sweden or Finland, should they choose to formally apply to the alliance. We'll respect whatever decision they make. And we've long supported NATO's open door policy and the right of all countries to decide their own futures.
Right. So, well, of course the US supports it. That's not a surprise. Of course. I mean, if we can be honest with each other, and that's what I like to do here, the United States is running the whole show. NATO is just an extension of the US, so it can have bases and, missile deployments and so on. One thing that a lot of people forget about the Cuban Missile Crisis is that, yes, it's true the US tried to, launch the Bay of Pigs and coup the government in Cuba, which is an attack. I mean, this is like an act of war, essentially. It is. But the other reason that the Soviets ended up putting nuclear missiles in Cuba, 90 miles away from the Florida Keys, is because the United States put nuclear missiles in Turkey called Jupiter missiles, right? And they were in striking range of Russia. So tit for tat. The agreement, how the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved, and I don't know if you hear this a lot, because some people think, well, Kennedy picked up the phone and he had some really harsh words to say, and that was it. The Russians, they packed up their missiles and left. No, the deal was that the Jupiter missiles, the American missiles in Turkey would be packed up. And to save face so that the American people and the Western world wouldn't know that, the Americans had dared to engage in diplomacy with the Russians, they deferred that until sort of a year later, right? I don't know if it's exactly 12 months, but certainly the next year. So they waited, about half a year to actually remove those missiles to make it look like it wasn't related to the resolving of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But what I'm trying to get at here is that I don't think the United States accepts countries or encourages countries to join NATO unless it can get something out of it, right? And having Turkey in for 70 years now, it presents a huge opportunity, right? It gives it access to the Mediterranean. It's Turkey. It connects, Asia to Europe. It's very, very strategic. And right now, what they're trying to do, we go back to the map, is increase their striking capability and basically put another thorn in Russia's side. So again, you see Finland shares 1,300 kilometers of border with Russia. And I don't know what to say here, because the whole point, what the Russians have been saying, is that this war, what's happening right now, one of the reasons is NATO expansionism, right? So Russia's saying, not Putin, because they want you to think this is Putin. It's not Putin. They've been saying this since 1990. Before that even. But my point is that for the last decades, the Russians have been very clear, you guys need to back off, meaning NATO. And what NATO has done, even after the Soviet Union ceased to exist, they have no reason to keep NATO. They not only keep it, but they keep expanding and keep expanding. Again, look at the map. Look how every couple of years they kept adding more and more countries. And Bush, during his tenure, really, ramped this up. Absolutely ridiculous. And Ukraine has not only a shared border with Russia, but also cultural ties, historical ties. So that's a whole other beast. But my point is here that the Russians are very clear. They want NATO to back off. And what is NATO doing? They're just provoking Russia even more. I don't really understand what the point of this is, except to escalate. Now, Putin's response to this is from Al Arabiya News. Russian President Vladimir Putin was quote-unquote calm and cool when informed of Finland's decision to apply for NATO membership, the Finnish president Niinisto told CNN on Sunday. Actually, the surprise was that he took it so calmly. But in security policy, especially talking with Russia, you have to keep in mind that what he said doesn't mean that you shouldn't be all the time quite well aware. I actually wanted to show you that clip. So if you'll give me a moment, I'll actually pull it up for you. We can watch it instead of me reading the transcript to you. Give me a second. Here we go.
Retaliate against you before your process continues and before you can fully qualify to be a member of NATO?
Actually, why I called him, I wanted just to confirm that now the situation is changed. We are going to apply membership. And in the same way, he confirmed that he thinks it's a mistake. We are not threatening you. Altogether, the discussion was very, would I say, calm and cool. And he didn't repeat those threats he had earlier and his people had been telling. That is that if Finland joins, that means some kind of contra steps, military contra steps, whatever that meant. But he didn't repeat it now, so I was not necessarily surprised, but it was, like I said, quite calm and cool.
Did he say anything that did surprise you?
Actually, the surprise was that he took it so calmly.
Do you
How can I say this? That's not necessarily a good thing. What I understood, what he just said, is that, when he spoke to Putin and said, we're going to join NATO, we meaning Finland, that Putin didn't say anything about, reactionary or not reactionary, sorry, but reciprocate measures, right? Well, yeah, because I think the whole point of him and his cabinet saying a week ago, 2 weeks ago, hey, if you join NATO, we will respond in kind with XYZ, was that was a warning, and now you've just gone ahead and done it. So there's no point telling you, but now there's going to be action, and this is the problem, man, because I'm laughing, but I don't find this funny at all. This is nervous laughter because these idiot politicians are going to start World War III if they're not careful. I really think that a lot of the times it's of course an exaggeration to say World War III, but I mean if there was a time in my lifetime, in our lifetime, to say you guys might start World War III because you're reckless, I think it's now. Once again, the whole point of Russia going into Ukraine, whether you agree with it or not, just like, even if you think Putin is a liar and and you think everything the Russians is saying is propaganda, ostensibly their argument is NATO expansion, Ukraine joining NATO is what caused this war. So it's a perceived threat, right? So why would you go and do the exact same thing to provoke Russia even more? Even better, why would you give Russia an excuse, a pretext to do something in the future? You could look at it that way, right? Why would you give them a pretext to undertake more military action and so on? Again, I'm not suggesting that they're going to invade Finland or something. Finland and Russia have a particular history, putting it mildly. But I'm not going to get into that now, even though I love doing the little history bits. I just want to bring you up to speed on this. My point is that, why would they give Russia this excuse? And the thing is, they are saying this will make Finland more secure and it will make Sweden more secure. Really? Are you sure? Are you sure? I don't feel this is making anyone in Europe more secure. On the contrary, actually. And again, it doesn't mean you have to like Russia or agree with what Russia's doing. It's just logical, right? You have a threat, right? In the Europeans' perspective, in the Ukrainians' perspective, there's a threat. Russia's a threat. And it's like you're trying to hit a beehive and the bees have already come out and now you're trying to whack it even harder. Why? Just why? I don't understand why they cannot find a diplomatic settlement. I really don't understand. All of this just to make more money. What's the point here? Because like I said, Sweden and Finland are already NATO partners. Swedish and Finnish troops can already fight with NATO forces if they're needed. This is really more of a formality than anything, right? And I'm not trying to downplay what it is. The whole point is that it does have significance, and it's basically giving the finger to the Russians. That's what it's really about. So my point is that when you're giving the finger to someone, in this case, it seems like an escalation, even if you don't agree or believe agree with or believe anything Russia's saying, right? I want to show you a tweet over here. This is from Alfred de Zea. So he was a former UN expert, and this is what he said. Sweden and Finland's bid to join NATO won't bring peace to Ukraine. I wonder whether they realize that NATO's record of war crimes in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria qualifies it for a quote-unquote criminal organization status under Article 9 of the Statute of the Nuremberg Tribunal. That's a very good point, honestly, because the Article 9 under the Nuremberg Statute basically implies that you can establish a connection between one member or perpetrator of a crime and all the other members of that organization, okay? So it's basically another way of saying guilty by association, right? Let me read it to you. At the trial of any individual member of any group or organization, the tribunal may declare, in connection with any act of which the individual may be convicted, that the group or organization of which the individual was a member was a criminal organization. Do you understand? So I really doubt this is going to happen, but one day, if we actually have people like Tony Blair and George Bush and Barack Obama and Keir Starmer's coming, God, Boris Johnson and all of these Western leaders that attacked and invaded and killed and committed crimes against humanity and crimes of aggression, if they're actually put on trial and NATO is, then you could go after Sweden as well, just being part of the group. I really don't think that's going to happen because we live in a very unfair world and the criminals are getting away with everything. But the Nuremberg, for those of you not aware what Nuremberg is, the Nuremberg trials or tribunal was right after World War II, where they put all the Nazis. This is the thing. It wasn't even just the high-ranking leadership, right? It really showed that even a mayor or, a low-ranking grunt, for lack of a better term, would be held responsible for this stuff. Hermann Göring, who was the head of the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, and of course, a Nazi party official, he committed suicide in his cell, right? He took a pill of cyanide like a coward. This is where they established the doctrine of crimes against humanity. So it wasn't just about war crimes anymore. It was crimes against humanity, right? The Holocaust, all of this senseless, vicious destruction of European cities. These things resonate to this day, right? People always talk about the Nuremberg Tribunal. So what I wanted to go back to here with Turkey is that you have to put this into context for Turkey, because Turkey refused to sanction Russia. Do you remember that? There was pressure on a lot of countries to sanction Russia. India was pressured, everybody, because they want to have, what they call an international stance against Russia. There isn't there's a Western stance against Russia, but to say that the whole world is united against Russia, it's not really true. And so to give, to lend credence to the Western position, they try to get countries like Turkey and so on. Turkey said no. Turkey refused to sanction Russia. Another thing that Turkey did, because they pressured it to close the Dardanelles Straits and the Bosphorus Straits so that Russian warships could not come through. What the Turks did, which is, I talked about this with Pepe, what our hypothesis is that Turkey, in order not to upset the Russians and not to upset NATO, what they did is they let the Russian ships through and then closed it to look like you see, we're blocking the Russians. Why is Turkey trying not to upset Russia? Well, let's look at it this way. Turkey gets 70% of its wheat from Russia. 45% of its natural gas demand comes from Russia. 17% of its oil comes from Russia. 40% of its gasoline comes from Russia. So you see, it's trying to walk a very fine line. And that's why Turkey refused to sanction Russia. As a matter of fact, they recently expanded the Mir payment system so that Russian tourists could come and use their credit cards, right? Because they've been banned from using... If you're a Russian and you have a Visa or MasterCard, I think you can still use it only inside Russia, but you cannot use it for international transactions, right? So the idea is that if Turkey expands Mir, which is the Russian payment system, then they can promote tourism. So my point is that they're not cutting off Russians like everyone else. So right now, this is quite a pickle. I'm really interested to see how this goes down because the thing is, you have a summit that was held today between the 5 countries that make up the Collective Security Treaty Organization. So this is basically what replaced the Warsaw Pact. after the Cold War. So just to refresh, just to jog your memory, during the Cold War, NATO was created in 1949, and in response in 1955, the Soviets created the Warsaw Pact, which is basically the Soviet version of NATO, right? And logically, at the end of the Cold War, because there was no more Soviet Union, they dissolved the Warsaw Pact, which is what NATO should have done. It should have been dissolved. They didn't dissolve it, did they? Now, at the same time, you have something that people refer to as a sort of replacement, quote unquote, of the Warsaw Pact. It's the CSTO. And today, they held a summit. So this is from Armen Press. So in Yerevan, in Armenia, they said the leaders of the CSTO adopted a joint statement after the summit in Moscow, addressing the need to ensure the security of borders in the organization's area of responsibility. The statement says that the CSTO is ready to ensure the security of its borders, including on the backdrop on the concerning situation in Afghanistan and other foreign borders of the organization's members. So you can see here, Putin is right there. You know, the CSTO has Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and I'm forgetting the very last member. Shame on me. But my point is that some people have looked at this and seen it as sort of a response to the things that are going on with NATO right now. I mean, I don't think it means much at the moment. I don't think the Russian reaction is going to be only through this. But my point is that, you know, they're making themselves aware. Another thing that I think is outrageous, and you're not going to believe this, do you know what the Americans are going to do now in a few days? They're going to hold war games 150 miles from St. Petersburg, right? So this is going to be in Estonia. And here's from Newsweek magazine. So NATO, Ukraine troops launch war games as Putin threatens Europe, they say. Okay? Now, it says Ukrainian, Finnish, Swedish, and American troops are among those who will be taking part in Estonia's SEAL, meaning hedgehog, military drill beginning next week, which will bring together more than 15,000 troops from 10 countries. Okay, so can I just put this into context for you guys? Let's look at how close Estonia is to Russia. A stone throws away, right? A stone's throw away. So that's St. Petersburg. If I'm not mistaken, that's where Putin was actually born. And they're going to bring 15,000 NATO troops right here to Estonia to hold military exercises in a simulation of a war with Russia. Can you imagine the reaction if Russia and Belarus and China brought 15,000 troops to hold, war games, I don't know, in Guatemala, in Mexico, even in Venezuela, right? Which is a bit further away. You get my point? Can you imagine the outrage? Or Cuba. Let's say just Cuba. Why not Cuba, right? Can you imagine? They would lose it. My God, they would lose it. They would lose it. Like, that would not even, there would be no discussion. They would just say it's an act of war. We have to go after them. So again, 15,000 NATO troops holding war games right here. And I must remind you something, why this is not just, I'm not just saying, oh, this looks like a provocation. No, this is straight up provocation. And in December, if you recall, Russia issued a list of demands in order to avert this crisis, this war, this terrible killing that's happening in Ukraine. And the Russians, they made several demands. They said, number one, we don't want Ukraine to join NATO. You have to forswear membership. And the other thing, one of the other points they said was that we don't want foreign NATO troops on our border. What does that mean? That means, for example, they don't want German troops or American troops or British troops coming to NATO countries that are on Russia's border. So they're not saying, oh, you should, kick Poland out of NATO or Estonia out of NATO. No, they just don't want troops from the UK or Germany, whatever, from other NATO countries coming specifically to their border, because that's a sign of provocation. And basically, that is exactly what they are planning to do with these war games. Now, you could argue semantics here and say, yeah, but this is just an exercise. It lasts a few days, then it's over. And Russia's talking about stationing them there. Come on. Don't be childish. I really don't like people who play dumb. You know goddamn well, if the Russians did this, they held war games on the United States doorstep, or the Chinese did that, all hell would break loose. Stop insulting your own intelligence. Stop disrespecting yourself and denying this and uttering gibberish out of your goddamn mouth. Stop being a hypocrite. We all know what the reaction would be, right? But of course, double standards. The Americans, they fly their nuclear bombers, their B-52s, next to Iran's airspace. And do you know what they call it? They don't call it a provocation, which is what it is. They call it, no, it's a show of force. I love this CIA lexicon, right? I really love how they can take any sort of evil, provocative, offensive thing and make it sound like some bureaucratic, a bureaucratic mistake or a bureaucratic procedure. It's a show of force, right? I see. So this is from Politico, and this is also a few hours ago, May 16th. Sweden and Finland's move to apply to join NATO is a quote-unquote grave mistake, and they should have no illusions that Moscow will simply accept their decision, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Monday. The situation, of course, is changing radically in light of what is happening, threatening that the mistake will have far-reaching consequences. They should have no illusions that we will simply put up with it. The general level of military tension will increase. Predictability in this area will become less. It is a pity that common sense is being sacrificed for some phantom ideas about what should be done in the current situation. Despite Turkey's reservations, the United States and NATO authorities said that they were confident Ankara would not block the bids. New members must be unanimously approved by existing allies to gain entry. So, I've presented to you what both sides are saying, and I've given you my opinion, and now it's up to you to make up your mind. But I will reiterate, I do not think this is correct. I think that there are other ways of stopping this war. Even if those ways are not clear, escalation is certainly not the solution. And this is, you cannot look at the situation and compare it to, any other conflict you like. Again, we are dealing with the United States, which is a nuclear-armed country, and Russia, which is a nuclear-armed country, actually with better and more nuclear weapons than the United States. So, this idea that, again, like he is saying, that the Russians are just going to accept this. No one would accept this. The Americans wouldn't accept this. And I would, if they were doing this, I would also be like, what the hell's going on? You guys are going to start World War III, right? I would say the same thing. But this is really provocative. This is reckless and absurd, and I don't know what they think they're going to accomplish by this. If anything, this is only going to make the Russians more on edge. It's going to put them more on edge. It's going to make the situation worse. Do you notice the language that he used, the Deputy Foreign Minister? He said less predictable. This is very important. Do you know why? Because in the Cold War, there were several instances where, I swear, I'm not kidding, we came this close to all being, eviscerated before we were even born, right? There were some instances in the Cold War where it was split second that nuclear war between Russia and the US was averted, right? There's a famous incident where the Russians on their radar, it looked like to them that the Americans had launched nuclear missiles. And I'm not going to go into the whole details of that story, but the guy made a good call of judgment, and because it turns out it was a false alarm, it was a false positive, they were not nuclear missiles, and thank God that was averted. So my point is that we have been very, very recently in a situation where Russia and the US have nukes pointed at each other and have gotten this close to blowing up the entire planet. I don't think that this is helping, and I don't think this is the right way to go. This is really reckless. And whether Turkey, we'll see what Turkey does, honestly. I think the Russians, I'm just speculating, I could be wrong, but I think the Russians already know where Turkey stands and what they're going to do. Me, I don't. I don't know if Turkey is going to block the bid or not, but I'm leaning towards Turkey allowing Finland and Sweden to join. I think that there's just too much at stake for, they're really going to pile on Turkey. What's interesting to see is the concessions, if any, that Turkey will be able to leverage from the West, from the EU, from NATO, in exchange for allowing Sweden and Finland to join. That is what I'm looking out for. And I'll, of course, keep you up to date on everything that's happening with Ukraine right here on the channel.